So we can model two types of major variations between x and y. One of them is inverse and one of them is direct. So the two variables x and y show direct variation when your y value is increasing also as x is increasing. So what that means is you're actually multiplying by x when you have direct variation. The second type is inverse variation, which is below. And what happens with inverse variation, as x is increasing, y is actually decreasing, and it's when y equals a number divided by x. So direct is multiplying, inverse is dividing by x. So if you guys kept plugging in larger numbers for x each time, if a is staying the same, well, 3 divided by 4 is one value, it's 0.75. But then if you did 3 divided by 5, or 3 divided by 8, or 3 divided by 9, it's going to get smaller and smaller as that denominator gets larger. So inverse is dividing by x, and your y value is actually getting smaller. Direct variation, you're multiplying by x, and your y value is getting larger. So in our examples, it asks us to say whether or not the equation shows direct, inverse, or neither of those types of variation. So the only thing you guys have to do is make sure your equation is equal to y. And once it is, you just see, okay, do we have direct or do we have inverse? If we don't have either of them, then it can be neither of those types of variation. But we do have to solve your equation for y first. So for number 1, for example, we have xy equals 7. We would want to divide by x. You get y equals 7 over x. So because you're dividing by x, this would be a type of inverse variation. So that's all you're doing, is solving your equation for y and then checking to see what type of variation you would have. So how about number 4? Y over 4 equals x. So I'm going to, y is being divided by 4, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. That will make that go away. Y equals 4x. So we've solved for y. We have 4 times x. That would be multiplying by x. So this would be a type of direct variation. So that's all you guys are doing, is solving for y and checking to see what type you have. So if you're adding or subtracting to your x value, you don't have either type. It has to be multiplied by x or dividing by x. So let's do one more. So number 5, I'm going to multiply by y. Seems a little silly because we're trying to get rid of y. But for right now, that will give us yx equals just 3. And then we can divide both sides by x to get y equals 3 over x. So this would also be a type of inverse variation. So if it's dividing by x, it's inverse. If it's multiplying by x, it's directly. So go ahead and try 2, 3, and 6. I'm going to go down here and go to number 8. So 7 asks or tells us that y varies directly. 8 says the variables x and y vary inversely. So if you look up at your two equations, y equals ax or y equals a over x, inversely is y equals a over x. So this is kind of a two-parter. Y and x are the variables that are changing. A is this like constant of variation that is always the same. And that's what your key concept box says up at the top. So that's the number that's always the same number no matter what. And all your other variables, x and y, are changing. So what we have to do is write an equation that relates x and y and find y when x equals 2. So the first thing you guys need to do is find your constant. You need to find a first using y is 7 and x is 4. So let's plug them in. So 7 equals a over 4. So if we're trying to solve for a, we multiply both sides by 4. And 28 would equal a. So that's the number, guys, that always stays the same. So the second part is writing an equation. And that's just putting your a value in there. So write an equation using your a value. So as x and y change, we're going to have y equals 28 over x. Okay, so we found a. We have our equation. And then it says, okay, now that we have our constant of variation, find y when x equals negative 2. So find y when x is negative 2. We know that a is 28. So what is 28 divided by negative 2? Y is negative 14. So it's sort of a multi-step thing. You have to use the first part to find the a value. So we used these guys to find a. Then once we had a, that's the number that stays the same. And it said, okay, well now find y when x is negative 2. So then you guys just kind of go from there to find your y. So go ahead and try number 7.